Welcome to There's No Place Like Home, the radio show coming to you on WRXB 1590 AM and Pinellas County Connection TV. This program is presented to you as an opportunity to hear information that can help you fulfill the dream of owning your very own home. We also share information about upcoming special events and programs to help you enjoy the good life here in Pinellas County, as well as other items of interest. The sponsor of this program is the Housing Finance Authority of Pinellas County, which offers the First-Time Homebuyers Program, your key to home ownership, helping people in Pinellas, Pasco, and Polk counties make their dreams of home ownership a reality. I'm Jane Merlin alongside Frank Bowman, your host for today's show. How are you today, Frank?
I'm doing very well. How are you, Jane?
I'm doing awesome. You know, this is such an interesting topic that we're going to be discussing today. I think it's really important that people really pay attention.
Yes, and it's a topic that is sort of timely in the news again. Discussions about whether the issues are still relevant or not. And I think the conclusion is they're very relevant in today's world. And this is it also highlights some historical facts about changes in America, and so it's a great show. And today we'll be talking about a very important topic that you may not think about too often. It's fair housing. In fact, April is Fair Housing Month. Coming up in a few minutes, we'll speak to representatives from the Office of Human Rights. Our guests are Paul Valenti, who's the director, and Mark Esparza, housing manager. Before we begin our discussion, Jane, I understand you have an update from our sponsor, the Housing Finance Authority.
Yes, I do, Frank. Thank you. The Housing Finance Authority, or HFA, is offering its first-time homebuyer program for individuals in Pinellas, Pasco, and Polk counties who have never owned a home, have not owned a home in the last 3 years, or veterans. The HFA offers a low rate on its 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, and if you need a little help with down payment and closing costs, they can help you with that also with the Home Key Second Mortgage. To get your key to homeownership, call 727-464-8210 or visit the website at pinellascounty.org/community/HFA. And Frank, I should mention that we've got a very nice news story featured on the HFA's website that shows one of our first-time homebuyers in her new home. One of the local news stations did a very nice package on her story, and she kind of describes the process that she went through in getting her first home using the HFA's program. So I would encourage people to tune in and check out the website for that story.
As we've always say, this is a really wonderful program and opportunity for people who are looking to buy a home. And hopefully folks will take advantage of that and go to the website and get a personal testimony as how wonderful that project is. Well, right now it's my pleasure to introduce our guests, Paul Valenti, who is the director of the Office of Human Rights. Paul assumed the duties of director of Pinellas County's Office of Human Rights this year, just a few months ago in January. Prior to joining us in Pinellas County, Paul served as the manager of Equal Opportunity for Lee County, Florida, and worked with the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. Paul is also an attorney who is licensed in Connecticut, Florida, and he licensed before the U.S. Supreme Court. What does that mean, Paul?
That just simply means that should the opportunity arise, I'd have the opportunity to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. I've never done so.
Oh, okay, because we were reading this and we were duly impressed. But
I wish I could make that claim.
Mark Esparza is the housing manager for the Office of Human Rights and began investigating complaints of discrimination for the city of St. Petersburg in 1994. He joined the county in 1999, where he continued investigating civil rights complaints. He is a certified mediator and continues to investigate claims of discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations under county and federal law. Bilingual in English and Spanish, and a member of the Florida Bar. Welcome to There's No Place Like Home, Paul, Mark.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Good to have you here. Paul, let's begin with you and start by welcoming you to Pinellas County.
Thank you very much.
And I know your predecessor. I actually knew him way back in the 70s, and when this particular function started, and You have some large shoes to fill, but
If I had a nickel for every time I heard that.
but I think you'll do a very good job.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit more about your background and what brought you here to Pinellas County.
Sure. Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing Mark and I to be here today. You've captured a large essence of it. I'm a licensed attorney. When I got out of law school, I did some corporate immigration work, which is nice work, but it wasn't that fulfilling. So I had an opportunity to work for the state of Connecticut at its Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, and even though it was a cut and pay, I said, you know what, that's more than offset by the joy that I'll get out of doing this type of work. So I was with the Connecticut Commission for about 5 years, and then I had an opportunity to take a managerial position with Lee County, Florida, about 2 hours south of here. I was with Lee County for about 6 years. They treated me very nice. But when the opportunity to come to Pinellas opened itself, I realized that this was an incredible opportunity not to be missed, not only for the stature, as you referenced, of Mr. Russell, but being in a more metropolitan area, more cosmopolitan, and having a bigger jurisdiction and a more diversity, I thought all were things that my wife and I were looking for. And Leon spoke so highly of his staff, including Mr. Esparza, Mark here. So I knew that was going to be the right fit.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're very glad that you're here. And I guess just as a quiz, let's tell us some of the specifics of the role of the Office of Human Rights.
Sure. Primarily for the folks in the public, we serve 3 functions. They're all investigative, but they're in 3 different realms of their lives. It's either if they believe they've been subjected to discrimination in the workplace or employment-based discrimination, whether, as we'll be discussing today, they believe they've been subject to discrimination in housing opportunities. And we also do public accommodation discrimination. In other words, restaurants, movie theaters, places that are generally available and open to the public, and whether somebody believes they've been refused service or treated differently for a prohibited reason. So that's kind of the broad view of what our office does and the types of laws that we enforce.
Can you give us a quick example of a specific kind of case that you might encounter?
Sure. And because we'll be speaking so much about housing in a little
Later,
bit,
yeah.
In an employment situation, let's say, for instance, a person has a disability and they need some accommodation to continue to work to perform the essential functions or duties of their job. They need to make that request to their employer, and if it is indeed a reasonable request being made, the law says, by and large, the employer ought to afford that accommodation to that employee. Mm-hmm. If that doesn't happen, that person can come to our office and lodge a complaint suggesting that, look, perhaps I'm a person with a vision disability. All I asked for was a larger computer screen. They wouldn't give it to me. Then the question becomes, is that reasonable? And we would submit that with a large enough employer, what's the cost of a larger computer screen? That probably is reasonable, and the law would probably say the employer is obliged to provide that.
Okay, that's good.
I think one of the interesting things for me when we were looking at this topic and coming up with our questions for discussion, and very timely in the news just recently, it makes me think about assumptions, assuming what constitutes a disability in someone's mind. And just as I mentioned recently in the papers, there was an article about an idea for citing people who are misusing handicap spaces, and I became very curious in reading some of the blogs on this particular story, where people were talking about having witnessed somebody parking in a handicap space and how unfortunate that they were taking advantage. But the one thing that we have to keep in mind is that we don't really know that individual's issues. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. And that's a great question, because a lot of what we try to protect against is stereotyping. Mm-hmm. And what you're discussing is exactly that, stereotyping. Somebody sees somebody who has mobility, perhaps doesn't appear to have an overt, easily eyed disability. They figure, well, this is a person who's taking advantage or abusing the system. But you don't know what's going on in the inside necessarily. You don't know perhaps the person has heart issues that makes walking long distances a problem. Perhaps they're emphysemic and breathing capacity is an issue. So I think what you're aligning to is the very thing we're trying to eradicate, which is people see things and immediately make assumptions when that's in our society. I like to think where it's a lot more about who you are and merit-based. Assumptions really have, and stereotypes have no role to play.
The old saying, "You can't judge a book by its cover,"
Exactly.
comes to mind. You know?
Exactly.
So, well, let's get into our topic of the month, fair housing, and why is April designated as Fair Housing Month?
That's a great question. And I know a lot of our listeners and viewers probably were born after the history of this, but for those of us who may have been around when it happened, although very young, as you remember, April of 1968 was a tragic month because that's when Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, and he had been leading, as you know, for some time the civil rights movement within the United States, and some progress had been made. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act had been passed, the Voting Rights Act had been passed, but there had been a push for fair housing rights as well. Well, with the assassination of Dr. King in April of 1968, President Johnson saw that as the impetus or initiative to finally bring that to the fore and have it done. And to his credit, within a week's time from the assassination of Dr. King, the Johnson administration had shepherded through both houses of the Congress the Fair Housing Act. And so because that happened within a week's time in April of 1968, April's become Fair Housing Month.
So what all comes into play when we talk about fair housing? What does that mean?
What it simply means is being afforded opportunities for housing shouldn't be based on factors that are illegal, factors that pretty much people can't control. In our language, in our everyday parlance, we talk about protected classes. That's a lawyer's way of simply saying no, groups that the law says you cannot discriminate against. And I'm going to count on Mark too, because I'm sure I'll miss one, right? But they're race, color, religion, gender, national origin, familial status, and disability. And am I missing one?
No, that's correct.
Covered them all. Yep. So the basic premise is, look, by and large, those are factors that you can't control. And by and large, these are not reasons that you should be denied an opportunity for housing.
Mm-hmm. And again, going back to those stereotypes that people often have, of those protected classes.
Right.
So what's Pinellas County going to do to celebrate Fair Housing Month? Do you have any special events or programs planned? We do. And of course, it's a month-long celebration because it's so important a topic. But in particular, on the 13th of April, Friday, April 13th, we're going to have a Fair Housing Symposium here in Pinellas at the Pinellas Realtors Organization facility on Ulmerton Road. We're going to start at 8 o'clock. It runs till about 4 o'clock, and it's actually a dynamic and exciting program. We've invited Congresswoman Castor to deliver a luncheon keynote address. We have continuing education credits for local realtors so that they can get CE credits for their profession, and we've invited attorneys to give training on reasonable modifications, reasonable accommodations, initiatives from the federal level for fair housing enforcement, and that would be by way of Sarah Pratt, who's the Director of Enforcement for the federal level of fair housing, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And we're offering all of that, including lunch, for $25. So for realtors, we can say for sure they'll be getting their continuing education credits. Continuing legal education credits will be applied for. So that's quite a bargain. It'll be informative, powerhouse speakers. So it's going to be a really dynamic program. Paul, would you also encourage somebody who's listening today, for example, maybe a landlord or property management
Absolutely.
individuals
Landlords,
to go?
property management companies, condo association officers, the whole. If your life touches upon real estate, apartments, mobile home communities, condo associations, and we'll get into later maybe how sometimes condo associations really could use this kind of education and training, you will derive benefit from this.
Give us some examples of various housing discrimination issues or situations that you've encountered.
Okay, that's a great question, and I know we'll bring in Mark later because
we can let Mark answer this.
Yeah, well, he handles it on the front line.
Yeah, I was going to say
housing manager. So.
Well, let's talk about that because as before, you're asking about some of the situations that we confront, and these days. Pursuant to the demographics in our county, we get a lot of service animal type requests based on disability. We get a lot of caregiver type requests based on disability. We also get challenges to pool rules, age rules at non-age qualified housing providers. And so we'll get cases like that. And again, anything that's going to be motivated by somebody's race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, familial status, or retaliation can be covered by the Fair Housing Act. And so typically, like today, for example, we'll have a number of caregiver cases, of service animal cases. Those are very big. Disability is a big basis here in our county, just due to the population that we have. And I tend to think it's going to continue to be a popular topic for everybody.
Well, what are some violations that you've encountered? Just an example.
Okay. A lot of times we'll get situations in which, going to what you were saying before, Jane, about non-visual disabilities, you'll have a situation where somebody will not be physically impaired. They might have a mental impairment. They'll be asking for some sort of companion animal, somebody who can address the symptoms of their mental disability. And you'll have the homeowners association or their residents, fellow residents, wondering why. They'll look at the person and say, "You're fine. You don't need this or that." But little do they know that the person might be stuck in their apartment for days at an end. They might be severely depressed, might have a history of depression. And a lot of times people don't want to talk about that. They don't want to go around announcing this to the homeowners associations, and so they're quiet about it. And so you'll have a situation where you'll have a conflict about that. And those are some of the typical issues that do come up. Other issues, like I said before, could be challenges to pool rules. You'll have some associations who will make a rule saying that, well, nobody under the age of 18 should be at the pool without adult supervision. That can be problematic because a lot of times those persons have the capacity to be unattended, and the rules can be over tough on some of the residents, giving them different terms and conditions of their housing, not giving them the benefit of their payments as rent.
I'm curious about the whole companion animal issue. What constitutes a companion animal?
Oh, good question. Good question. And you know, there's a lot of confusion about that. But you know one thing? A service animal is a service animal, depending on, it really doesn't matter what type of disability it is servicing. It could be servicing a mental disability. It could be servicing a physical disability. The elements of law are all going to be the same. That is, you have to have a disability, first off, to have this right. Secondly, you have to make a request to your housing provider that you need this type of accommodation. 3, the accommodation must be necessary to afford you equal enjoyment of your dwelling. And 4, you must be denied. And 5, it must not be an undue burden. And so whether it's a seeing animal, a seeing eye dog, or an epilepsy dog, or a hearing dog, or an animal for somebody with a post-traumatic stress disorder, or bipolar, or schizophrenia, you're going to have the symptoms being addressed by that one particular animal. And I submit to you that sometimes the animal can be better than the medicine or the side effects of medicine, because I've seen doctors actually suggest that, saying, hey, we can give more medication, or we can have the benefits of this animal, which might have the same type of function and result.
So under that kind of situation, if a housing facility, say a rental apartment, normally would not permit folks to have pets, they are required to allow tenants to have service animals.
That's correct. And that's exactly the rub that we see a lot of times. You'll have a housing provider that has either a pet weight limit, or they'll have a pet section of the park, or else they'll have no pets allowed, or only certain types of pets, cats, birds, hamsters, things like that. But if somebody has medical corroboration, because when we go through this process, we would like to get third-party verification of that somebody in fact is disabled, because we're not medical providers in a sense. We'll ask their doctors to establish this. And once we have that, we look at it and we see if the accommodation is reasonable, if there is a nexus between the symptoms or the disability and what the animal can provide, well, then it goes together to making a good decision, or a decision about whether it's reasonable or not, to require, as a matter of federal law, that the housing provider permit and allow that animal to be there.
That's right. And once the person asking for this accommodation shows those items, then it really puts the burden on the housing provider to articulate why it's either unduly expensive or fundamentally alters what they do to allow them to deny it. So it kind of shifts the inquiry now onto the respondent, and why can't you allow this?
So the individuals have to have some kind of documentation from a third party, a physician or
Well, let's talk about that, because as a matter of law, technically, you would not necessarily have to have that. However, as this is a legal process, and as we're going forward, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask persons to provide some sort of verification, because we don't know necessarily who people are. They come to our offices to use our services, and so we think it's quite fair if somebody's going to be asserting that they're disabled to have some sort of corroboration for that, whether it be coming from their medical practitioner or be coming from somebody else who might know. But as a matter of point, the Fair Housing Act leaves it quite wide open as to the basis of information to satisfy that need.
Absolutely. It could be a social worker. If you think about veterans, say, maybe they have a VA caseworker who's familiar with a mental condition with which this veteran is dealing.
Yeah.
That's not a per se perhaps doctor, but they too can provide that type of information in support of the claim this is a person with a disability.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked, you seem to have indicated that the predominance of potential violations have to do with disabilities and with service animals. Are we to a point in our society where racial issues and perhaps gender issues are no longer a serious concern for fair housing? Or?
You know, that's an interesting question, and I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I would say that if you look at numbers, I would guess that the numbers would be going down. However, it depends, I guess, who you are. If you're the person who lost out in that one particular transaction, you might not agree. But overall, when looking at the numbers here, I have noticed an increase in disability-related issues and complaints, whether it comes from disabled parking spaces at private residences, at housing providers. That is usually the rising number that we're seeing and getting. And so to answer your question, I would say that I don't know, but overall I would tend to think that, I'd like to think that there's a trend of, yes, that is occurring.
Okay.
And you had asked about sex or gender-based discrimination. You know, often how you see it is a situation where it's a person who maybe has limited means financially, and the landlord is aware of this, and so the sexual harassment occurs, and that is a form of sex discrimination. In other words, the landlord simply says, there are other ways you can pay rent. Well, that's a violation of law.
And that falls under fair housing.
And that would be a fair housing violation, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, if somebody feels like they have experienced some level of discrimination, how do they approach your office? What do they do to register a complaint?
We can be contacted various ways. But we have a website. You can contact us by telephone, email, come in person if you would like, and we offer our services. We're the ones who are authorized and responsible for enforcing the anti-discrimination laws. And so under the Federal Fair Housing Act, you have the right yourself to proceed to court. You have 2 years from the date of the harm to proceed with your own attorney on your own dime. However, should you wish to use the administrative process, our agency, you have 1 year from the date of the harm to come use us. We're completely free to the public. And we will investigate the claim of discrimination in a neutral way. So persons would come to us and we would go through their story to see if true, the facts would constitute a violation of law. And we'll ask them who was treated better, who are your witnesses, write down your story, and try to look over all the matters before we serve it on the respondent to have them address the situation and provide an answer.
Right. And that's important. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's actually important because I think sometimes on the defense side, either in employment or housing, there's perhaps a sentiment that offices like ours have the thumb on the scale. We absolutely do not. We investigate these objectively, neutrally. The facts are what the facts are as best we can determine them, and then we apply the law as best we understand it. We don't go in with any preconceptions. We don't go in with a quote-unquote, I know we've talked about service animals, but with a dog in the fight. We just, we go in, let's see what the situation is, what the facts are, and what we understand the law to be.
Now, I know each case is going to be different and has different nuances and everything else, but how long would somebody expect their complaint to be investigated and your findings put together?
Under law, we're allowed 100 days. That's what the HUD would like us to do it, and that's on the statute itself. But it takes a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on some of the factors involved. You can have persons who require or request an extension. You could have complex issues. You could have multiple witnesses. So it really depends on the issues you're confronting and how many parties are involved, because some cases can get resolved quickly. One of the things that we offer once somebody files a complaint with our office is mediation. We will offer a mediator, a confidential setting, a voluntary setting for persons to go into a room to talk to the other side, to begin a dialogue, to see if they can work it out. Because many times, if they can work it out, the matter's over right then and there, on their terms. And that way we can achieve a resolution very, very quickly. If not, we have to go to a decision. We have to actually go to a determination. That can take time. And but we got to cross the T's and dot the I's. So that's what happens.
So some situations can be easily rectified at a mediation. You can come to terms and an agreement. What about those cases that are a little bit more complex and you do find that there's been a violation? Is there a fine?
What we'll typically do is we'll have the legal department concur with our decision. They will give it their legal blessing, and we will go forward on the matter. And damages are available to the parties. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act, we have a contract with HUD that if we find cause, we have to litigate on behalf of the charging party. We will do the litigation against the housing provider. And what we end up doing is that if a lot of cases resolve during that process, but if not, we will go before a judge and get a decision. And that's what the judge will determine damages at that time.
A lot of this, I guess, has to be made aware to the people providing housing and accommodations. What kind of educational opportunities does your office provide for anyone who wants to make sure they're complying with these laws?
Right.
Upon notice, upon request. If homeowner associations need our services, all they have to do is call, and we can go out and do a question and answer session and even leave off materials with them. We routinely go about different organizations in our community to speak at their meetings, because to me, spreading the word is half of the battle in a sense.
Absolutely.
Giving people the information so that they can make the best decision for all involved, and that's the most efficient way to do it. But to answer your question, we have information on our website. We can provide information upon request via email or via mail or in person, because we have no problem sending out speakers to address concerns.
Absolutely. Oh, that's
and
great.
we do that free of charge. One of our obligations pursuant to our arrangement, our partnership with HUD, our federal partner, is to provide education and outreach. And Mark's done a wonderful job with it in the community. He's probably well known among realtors, community managers, et cetera. And so we'll do that free of charge. So if there's an interested group, a condo board that believes their officers need training, as I said, we're doing a symposium on April 13th at the Pinellas Realtors Organization. Get that plug in again. We certainly... that's a core function of what we do in the housing program, is to do the education and outreach.
And if folks need to get in touch with you, you've mentioned a website, you've mentioned a phone number. Give us some specifics. What are those?
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay. Well, our main office number is going to be 727-464-4880. We also have a presence on the Pinellas County government webpage. It's Pinellas County Office of Human Rights. If you Google that, it will come up. And at that site, we have various links, even a listing of staff members. We also have various emails that we can contact us by, the members of the public. But primarily, you can contact us via the internet and our main phone number.
Well, this has been an awesome discussion today, really informative, and you've helped, I think, address a lot of confusing issues for people to help them understand it better. And the symposium sounds great.
Yeah.
April 13th.
It's going to be a real value for people who attend.
Yeah. Definitely encourage those who are listening and have a vested interest in this to definitely attend that program. We are, once again, all out of time. It just goes way too fast. I want to thank you, Paul Valenti and Mark Esparza with the Pinellas County Office of Human Rights. We also want to thank our Pinellas County Communications Department and, of course, WRXB 1590 AM. And we also look forward to having you join us next month for another edition of No Place Like Home. If you've missed any part of this show or would like to catch past shows, check out our website or catch us on YouTube. I'm Jane Merlin.
And I'm Frank Bowman.
Thanks for tuning in, and remember, there's no place like home.